Today, we're going on a bit of a journey, a thousand-year journey to be exact. We're going to explore the incredible story of how a small group of nomadic tribesmen rose up to become a global superpower, and then, in a blink of an eye, transformed into the modern republic we know as Turkey.
And the whole story really pivots on this one single year, 1923. World War I is over, empires are crumbling, and out of the ashes of a once unstoppable force, the modern Republic of Turkey is officially born.
Now, Turkey just celebrated its 100th birthday, its centennial. That's a huge milestone. But here's the thing. This was not your typical independence story. In fact, it's a story unlike almost any other in modern history.
Which brings us to the big question. Independence. From who exactly? You know, most countries celebrate gaining freedom from a foreign power, right? Like from the British or the French. But Turkey declared its independence from itself, from its own past. To get what this means, you have to look at Turkey's founder. This guy, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. He didn't just win a war of independence. He went a step further and completely dismantled the 600-year-old Ottoman dynasty. And in doing that, he also abolished the caliphate, a religious and political institution that had been the center of the Muslim world for 1,300 years.
So to understand just how radical that move was, we need to rewind, way back. Because the people we know as the Turks, well, they didn't even come from the land we now call Turkey. Their story actually begins thousands of miles away on the massive, open plains of Central Asia. For a long, long time, the Turkic peoples were kind of on the sidelines of history. But then, a major power shift happened in the heart of the Islamic world that changed everything. The first caliphate, the Umayyads, were very Arab-focused. But the dynasty that replaced them, the Abbasids, had a totally different approach. They were way more inclusive, opening the doors for non-Arabs. This move was a magnet for talent from all over the world, and it created a huge opportunity for new groups to rise up. And this is where the Turks step onto the world stage. As the Abbasid Empire expanded, these Turkic tribes started converting to Islam. Pretty soon, one of their leaders, Seljuk, founded his own massive empire. But here's a key point. They were sultans, political rulers, not caliphs. And when that Seljuk Empire started to fade, a tiny, overlooked tribe on the frontier, led by a man named Osman, began its own unbelievable rise. Now, Osman's descendants, who we call the Ottomans, came up with a game-changing strategy. Instead of picking fights with other powerful Muslim empires, they turned all their attention west, towards Christian Europe. And that single decision would literally reshape the map of the world. And in 1453, that strategy led to a moment that nobody thought was possible. Sultan Mehmed II conquered Constantinople, the legendary, impenetrable capital of the Byzantine Empire. This sent an absolute shockwave across the planet. Suddenly, the Ottomans weren't just a regional power, they were a world power, and the undisputed leaders of the Muslim world. But wait, there was still a catch. Even after this amazing victory, the Ottoman rulers were still just sultans. Yeah, they were incredibly powerful kings, but they weren't caliphs. The caliph was supposed to be the spiritual successor to the Prophet Muhammad himself, and that title was still held by an Arab down in Egypt. So how on earth did a Turkish sultan get his hands on that ultimate prize? Well, fast forward about 50 years after the fall of Constantinople, Sultan Selim I decides to shift his focus away from Europe for a minute. And in one lightning-fast campaign, he attacks the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt and just completely steamrolls them. In a single year, he doubles the size of the Ottoman Empire. Just like that. And that conquest led to this incredible, historic moment. Selim brought the last caliph from Cairo to Istanbul, where the title and all its sacred relics, like the Prophet's own sword, was formally handed over. And for the very first time in history, the caliph was a Turk, not an Arab. The Ottoman Empire was now the Ottoman Caliphate, the undisputed superpower of the world. Okay, so if the Ottomans were the most powerful empire on the planet 500 years ago, what in the world happened? How did they go from the top of the world to an empire on the verge of collapse, needing to be saved from itself? Well, it wasn't one thing. The decline was a long, slow burn caused by three main cracks in the foundation. First, an external shock. Europe discovers the Americas, and all that New World gold and silver floods in, making them rich and powerful. Second, internal decay. A crazy period of palace intrigue called the Sultanate of Women leads to endless power struggles that really weaken the government. But it was that third factor that was the real killer. At the exact same time the Ottomans were at their absolute peak, Europe invents the printing press, a world-changing technology.
But when it gets to the Ottoman Empire, the religious scholars and the top officials basically say, nope, this is forbidden.
And you just can't overstate how devastating that decision was. It created this massive gap. While Europe is exploding with new ideas, science, and military tactics thanks to mass-produced books, the Ottoman Empire is still copying everything by hand. Think about it. European armies were getting standardized artillery manuals. Ottoman gunners, they were still relying on what someone told them. By the time they finally lifted the ban, 200 years later, it was too late. The damage was done. The gap was just too big to close.
So let's jump to the early 20th century. The Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe, as they called it, sided with Germany in World War I and lost. The empire was about to be carved up and disappear forever. But out of those ashes, a war hero named Mustafa Kemal Ataturk comes forward with this incredibly radical vision: to build a brand new, modern, secular nation by completely and totally erasing the Ottoman past. And Ataturk's reforms were anything but subtle. They were fast, they were aggressive, and they were designed to force Turkey to look towards a Western secular future. I mean, he didn't just abolish the caliphate, he threw out the Arabic script and replaced it with Latin letters, a move that basically made generations of Ottoman literature and religious texts unreadable to the average Turk. He banned traditional clothing like the hijab and the fez hat in public buildings. He even forced the call to prayer to be recited in Turkish instead of Arabic, and that lasted for 18 years.
So Turkey's 100-year story isn't about freedom from some foreign country. It's about a revolutionary, and pretty brutal, break from its own identity, its imperial and religious soul. And that leaves us with a really tough question. Was erasing 1,000 years of history the necessary price for creating a modern nation? Or was it a tragic loss of a world-shaping heritage? It's a question Turkey is still wrestling with to this very day.